All right. Well, thank you all for getting up early this morning and coming out to see the last round of talks. Appreciate you all being out here. Hopefully everyone had a great time at the party last night. All right. Without further ado, I want to introduce a person I know I've had a couple of good conversations with and has helped me out a lot. So without much further ado, Martin Boss.
Thank you, sir. All right. So thanks, everybody, for getting up at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I'm actually glad there's not more people here. I do get nervous. Cool. So I'm just going to do a little, this is not a technical talk. I usually do really technical stuff, but I'm trying to do something different this year because I've decided that we have some other problems and they're not technical in the security industry. So this is a talk about, am I ready for a pen test? Who here works for an organization that does blue team type stuff? Who has pen tests? Who has pen tests that end on Monday at lunch? Awesome. All right, so first thing I want to do is thank CircleCitycon. I love it when local cons pop up in the neighborhood. This is only an hour and a half away from me from my house, and they did a really great job here, and they made the atmosphere really good, and that's what's important for me about a conference is the atmosphere. So everybody give a good round of applause for CircleCitycon. Fuck, it's early. This is a little bit about me. I'm a penetration tester full-time. I also work on the Kali Linux project. I got a little con we do called DerbyCon. I'm not a CISSP, so I'm just going to get that out there. And that's my handle on the Twitters if you're into that. Well, I also want to thank Georgia. She stayed up She stayed up really late with me last night and worked on these slides and helped me out and proofread them all because she's awesome. She just wrote a book, so everybody should go out and buy it. It's a book about pen testing, so it's going to go with my talk. Took me a really long time to find that picture. It was almost lost on the internet. Here's my disclaimer for my talk. If you're one of those assholes that spends their entire life trying to figure out how other people plagiarize and ruin their life, I'm just going to tell you, like, right now, I stole all these pictures off the internet and I didn't cite any of them. So let's just get that out of the way. All right, cool. So what are we talking about here? So what we're talking about is penetration tests and vulnerability assessments and risk assessments. Does anybody actually know the difference between all those three things? Cool. Well, there'll be a test here in a minute. So what we want to say is who, what, where, when, and how, right? So basically, who's doing the test? What kind of test is it going to be? Where are we doing it? And how are we going to do it? We're going to talk about high-impact vulnerabilities. Does anybody know what those are? HIV. It's horrible. We're going to talk about cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene is important. We're going to talk about organizations' security maturity. We're going to talk about risk appetite and thought leaders. This slide was how many buzzwords that really don't even exist can you put on one slide. All right, so like I said, I'm a penetration tester. I go to a lot of organizations. A lot of them are Fortune 500 companies. A lot of them have a ton of fucking money, and security budget is not their problem. I realize in smaller organizations, sometimes the budget is the issue and scope and penetration testing and stuff, but a lot of the places that I go, it's not. You know, the problem is organizations look like this, right? You just heard this talk about incident response. Bomb goes off, total fucking train wreck. Some asshole throws a ton of money at it, and it never gets fixed, right? So that's pretty much what most of the organizations I go to look like. And then what happens is you get this guy who's going to roll in. Anybody know that guy? That's right. So he rolls in and he goes, what you guys need is a penetration test, right? Because that's sexy, because it sounds cool, right? What doesn't sound cool is a risk assessment. What doesn't sound cool is a Nessus scan. But a penetration test sounds cool, right? So this guy's going to come in and he's going to sell you a penetration test. for 50K or 100K or whatever on your organization, and he's going to say, I'm going to bring Martin Boss in, he's going to do a penetration test, and everything's going to be great after that, right? So, let's define a few terms, right? Because I know you all said you knew what the difference between them was, but do you really know? So let's talk about what the difference is. So, here's the definition of penetration test that I like, right? So a method of evaluating the security of a computer system or network by simulating an attack from malicious outsiders, right? So what we're trying to do is simulate the way that somebody from the outside would attack you. Does that mean that we're going to find every vulnerability? Does that mean that we might only find one vulnerability? Does that mean that our report might be really small because we only found one vulnerability? Does that mean that's going to fix your entire organization? But so, the cool thing about it is that, and I'm not going to pimp the place that I work, but most companies do this. The cool thing about this is that companies do all kinds of other stuff, right? And unfortunately, some of it's not very sexy. Do I want to do a HIPAA assessment? Fuck no, it's not sexy. But is that a critical piece of information that people need to know in a company? Absolutely. So, companies offer other things, such as a vulnerability assessment. Everybody makes fun of vulnerability assessments, right? They make fun of scanner monkeys and script kiddies and people that come in and just run the vuln scanner. And there are companies that do that incorrectly. However, vulnerability scanners are a really useful tool, right? Because if I come into an organization and they got 10,000 IPs and they're paying me $500 an hour to be there, they're going to be broke by the time I find every vulnerability with Nmap. So the thing is that vulnerability scanners are really useful tools, right? So the definition I like for that is the process of identifying, ranking, and prioritizing the vulnerabilities in a system or network. The most important part here is prioritization, right? Because vulnerability scanners are notorious for ranking things totally off the charts, right? So instead of just giving them the report, what our job as a consultant is to help them prioritize those vulnerabilities based on their environment, right? That's our piece, and that's what separates a consulting company from a scanner monkey, is being able to say, I know Nexpo said these SSL2 version 2 findings were high or critical or whatever, but, we're on an internal network. You don't have PCI compliance. You don't have this, that, and the other, so we can deprioritize those all the way, and you don't really got to worry about it. This heartbleed stuff that it said was a medium is a little bit more important, right? And so we'll jack that up. So, unfortunately, vulnerability scanners are stupid, and they're only as good as the person running them, but it's an effective tool. Then there's the risk assessment. I can't even do this at my work. We got special guys and girls, and they love to do this. They love to come in and do a risk assessment. And this is really, really important. And the reason that I talk about this is because, as a pen tester, I don't like to talk about risk because I'm into black and white, right? It's either broke or it's fixed. It's either on or it's off, right? That's how I am. But the thing is that that's not the case in most organizations. And so most organizations need a risk assessment. There's a couple of reasons. During a risk assessment, a lot of things like they'll do is they'll look at all of the company's policies, right? And then they'll have some kind of charted map standard, and they'll say, okay, in this business vector, you're supposed to have policies for all of this type stuff, right? And the reason that's important is because I don't know how many times I've come in and owned an organization and said, you all should be doing this, and they said, we had no idea because nobody ever told us. So if there's no policy in place, how can you expect the people in your organization to follow the rules, right? So, think about it. When you go somewhere and there's no rules posted, you just do whatever, right? So, unfortunately, we have to post rules. And so that's what's really important for me about a risk assessment, right? There's a couple of other things, and we'll get to those later on. Then there's one other type of testing. This is the worst kind of testing ever. Right? So, unfortunately, a lot of people do testing driven by compliance, right? And so, if you're going to do this, don't even hire us. Because the problem is that, You know, and everybody knows this. People say it all the time that compliance is not security. Now, the one good thing about compliance that I will say is that if you have zero security at your organization, compliance is a good place to start, right? It's like square one. Like, all right, we got nothing. Where do we start? And I'm like, all right, let's start at compliance, right? And then we'll move into some real security. So, now you're asking, how do I know if I really need a pen test, right? Because the point of this is I want people to go back to their organization and decide, you know, whether they really need a pen test or whether they need one of these other types of things first. So, first off, if you're using some shit like this, not good. This type of thing I see in a lot of organizations, right? And this is where the problem here is that groups like, you know, PCI or risk or global risk and compliance or whatever fancy term they thought, you know, came up for it, have some type of formula, you know, for their machines. And so if you're using something like this, automatic failure, because the problem is that this kind of stuff doesn't apply to real remote code execution vulnerabilities. And this stuff, you see what's not, you know, listed here is we got the affected computers times risk times machine, but you know what's not listed here is that the lady at the front desk will let me write in when I say please. You know, so like, I really don't care what the probability of the risk of the machines is. So, if you're using a formula like this, unfortunately, it's terrible. So that's usually the first thing I look for when I go into organizations. I'm like, all right, how are you prioritizing, you know, your data? We'll talk about that more in a second. The next thing you need to know is, what are you trying to protect? The first thing I do when I come into an organization is I'm like, what is the critical asset? You know, and this should be determined during the scoping process, really. I honestly should not have to ask a customer this because I should already know when I go into an organization what their crown jewels is. I'll just give an example. I was talking about this the other day. I went and I did a pen test on a oil and gas company, and I got in there and like, you know, like I owned everything and blah, blah, blah. And like, and I got all of their, you know, customer data out of the database, and I had everybody's like, you know, they didn't have any social security numbers, but they had like, you know, like their payment information or whatever. And so I got all of that, and I was all high-fiving, and like, I was like, all right, I got the critical data. And they were like, you know what, we don't really care about that stuff. And I was all like, really? What? And so the thing is that what they really cared about was they had these database full of CAD drawings that mapped out surveyed locations for drilling for new oil. See? I didn't even think of that shit, right? Because I don't drill for oil and I don't know anything about oil and gas, right? So if they would have defined that critical data to me before the pen test, I could have tailored the test against their critical data and they would have got a lot more value out of it. So knowing what you're trying to protect is really, really important, right? And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the IT departments that I go into do not know what they're trying to protect, right? And so they have this mandate of protect everything, right? Which we all know that doesn't work. So, the worst thing when I go to an organization, low-hanging fruit. This is what I like to call HIV, high-impact vulnerabilities. A lot of times I come into the network and it's just full of the HIV. It's terrible. So, what do we mean by low-hanging fruit? Does anybody here not know what MS-0867 is? This is probably Microsoft's most famous vulnerability. It's so fucking awesome that we're making it birthday cakes every year because it's still working. It's unbelievable. Like, it's totally unbelievable. And the crazy thing is like, XP is at end of life. I mean, like 2003 server probably should be. And so we're still winning off this vulnerability, and it's insane. What really blows me away is when I go somewhere and they've actually patched past this, but somehow missed this during the patching process. That's my favorite, right? When like 1220 is patched, but 0867 is still there. The reason that I put this stuff up there is because this is the kind of thing that is found by a vulnerability assessment or a vulnerability scanner, right? If you have this on your network, you've totally wasted all your money having me come in. So low-hanging fruit. What I'm doing here is I'm talking about the top couple types of low-hanging fruit I see in an information. on an assessment. Default passwords. I mean, really? So this is all stuff that if you had a vulnerability scanner in place or you were doing a vulnerability assessment, this stuff would have all been fixed, right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of times Telnet. I mean, it's crazy. Default passwords are totally crazy. I don't even understand how you can have even one person in a security organization and have one default password on your network. I mean, if that was me, they'd be fired. My next favorite, Tomcat. Tomcat is so awesome because the thing that's crazy about Tomcat is that it's just not, us in the security industry, we all know about it, but it's just not widely televised that you can get remote code execution from a Tomcat server. And I just tell you, I'm going to talk a little bit more about network segmentation later, but this always happens because a developer stood up a Tomcat machine and he joined it to the domain and he worked on his application and he never ever thought about securing the Tomcat underbelly. I find this on every single pen test. This comes out of a vulnerability scanner, right? There's no reason this should be on your network at all. Cold motherfucking Fusion. Sorry, I cuss a lot. Are there any kids here? Sorry. Anyway, I love Cold Fusion. It's awesome because it just gets worse and worse every time they put out a new version, right? They finally got it together a little bit. It's so awesome that my buddy Elliot, maybe I can't say that. That might be under NDA. Sorry, anyway. So I got a good buddy that helps me out all the time with Cold Fusion, and it's so awesome that, it does, I don't know if anybody knows this, but basically every single version except for 10 had this authentication bypass where you would just put a URL in, it would give you the password hash, and you wouldn't even have to crack it because it was so awesome. They made it like Microsoft so you could just pass the hash to the browser. Super baller. Then you upload a shell and it's game over. Every pen test has Cold Fusion. So what am I talking about on all there? I'm talking about patching, right? Almost all of those issues could have been fixed with patching or a vulnerability scanner, right? And so what the problem that I see in organizations is that they don't have a vulnerability management program, right? They don't have patching. And if they do have a vulnerability management program, it's focused on Windows. And nobody cares about, Linux. Nobody cares about, Macs are getting up there, right? I see them in organizations a lot more all the time. Nobody cares about any of the web applications, or, there's people that care about them, but they all work in different parts of the organizations and they're not all on the security team together. So basically, if you have any of those issues on your network, as soon as I come in on Monday morning, we're doing this. It's pure, plain and simple, right? Plain and simple, we're doing this. So if that's happening, here's the first thing I tell people when I go in an organization. So as soon as we've burned a few, 50K, the next thing I tell them for their 50K, buy a fucking vulnerability scanner, right? Because all you did was pay me $40,000 or $50,000 to come in and do the work of a, Nessus is like $1,200. If you can't afford that, go out of business, And Nexpo's $3,000. I don't know how much some of that fancy shit like Koalas is, but all I know is that Nessus and Nexpo's are both great vulnerability scanners. They have their downfalls, but they're good. If you're not scanning with a vulnerability scanner and picking up these easy wins, you don't have any business hiring a pen tester to come in and look at your organization. All right, so now that we're through the easy stuff, the next thing you want to do is assessing your maturity model, right? Has anybody ever heard of the P-test? Awesome. So the P-test is called the Penetration Testing Execution Standard. It was got together and wrote by a bunch of penetration testers, and it was written for a few reasons, right? It was written to sort of get a methodology for penetration testers where everybody agreed on sort of the activities that should take place during a penetration test, and that's all cool. But more importantly for me, and the reason that I like it so much, is I like to suggest it to customers. I like to be like, you know what? Here's a penetration testing execution standard, and what you can do is use this as a roadmap to make sure that you are getting what you paid for, right? You need to check behind these penetration testers because a lot of them are super egotistical douchebags. And did anybody see Dave's slide with the cat that said, walk in, fuck shit up, walk out? That's what we do, right? And we're all high-fiving on the way out and everything, and there's nobody checking behind us to make sure that we actually did our job. So It's really, really important. And I may have jumped the gun on that. I might have another slide about that, but fuck it. Anyway, so another really important thing that you can do with the penetration testing execution standard is assessing your security maturity of your organization. And I know that sounds like a buzzword, but every organization is at a different spot. You cannot put them in a box, right? Everybody's excelling in one places. I've been to places where they have unpatched crap all over the network, but they have a badass incident response team, right? But they fix, it's kind of like they were just talking about in the talk before this. They fix stuff really good after it breaks, right? But nobody's doing any preventive maintenance. So there's a whole lot of guidelines in the P-test talking about levels. And so it's so that you can rate your organization and figure out where the risk is. Oh, am I not talking in it good enough? Oh, sorry. It's, jeez. All right, so, it's so that you can rate your organization and figure out where you are in the security maturity, right? So, basically, like, you can decide which type of these tests that you're ready for, right? The order that I like to have these tests go in is I like to, number 1, buy a fucking phone scanner. Number 2, have a risk assessment, right? Have some nerdy guys come in and make sure that you have all your policies and standards and all of that stuff in place. The next thing you do is have a vulnerability assessment. That's when somebody comes in and runs a vuln scanner and makes sure that your dude with the vuln scanner is doing what he's supposed to be doing. And more importantly, it makes sure that the person that's supposed to be remediating the vulnerabilities is doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And so once you get a clean vulnerability scan and you think you're doing good and your internet perimeter is looking good, then you hire a pen tester to come in and find all the shit that you didn't think about. That brings us into cyber hygiene. See, that's how we do it, right? We do scanning, we do remediation, we do retesting. Something that I see some organizations do that's working really well is sanctions and rewards, right? Because does anybody at your organization get anything for reporting a vulnerability? I didn't think so. Does anybody get fired for not reporting a vulnerability? I didn't think so. Do your developers get fired for standing up Tomcat boxes and not changing the password? So there's nothing, right? There's no sanctions and there's no rewards. Now, I'm not going to say whether I think punitive or rewarding is better because it's different in every organization. I'm a big fan of, like, the $10 Starbucks cards, like shit like that. I mean, like, because I'd rather give out a couple $100 worth of $10 Starbucks cards for people reporting phishing emails than spend $100K on a breach. Just me. Anyway, third-party testing. Third-party testing is important. You can't trust fucking anybody, even the people on your own team. So test behind them, right? Risk appetite. The thing that's awesome about risk appetite is I used to be super anti-risk back in the day. I'm like, dude, it's either broke or it's not, right? It's either exploitable or it's not, or it's 1 or it's 0. It's either on or it's off, right? Because that's how I am, and that's how most computer people are. But the sad part of it is that you can't fix everything, right? So you do have to have what's called a risk appetite. You have to have smart people in place that can say, this stuff is not as risky as this stuff, so we can lower prioritize it. Now, that's not to say that it shouldn't be fixed and it shouldn't be tested. That just means if you have a limited budget and limited personnel, that stuff can be put on the back burner. What happens a lot of times is that organizations get all caught up in fixing like SSL2 vulnerabilities because they have to patch PCI or whatever, and they have like 50 kachillion of them or something like that, and they miss that one cold fusion server. And so, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen anybody get owned from a SSL v2 vulnerability, but I see people get owned by cold fusion all the time. So having somebody in there, and that's what, that's what all of these tests should help you redefine your risk appetite. And so I know it's a stupid term and I make fun of it all the time, but it's seriously legit. So monitoring. This is probably the most important thing you can be doing in your organization, right? Because there's no way that you can see everything, and there's no way that you can stop every single pen tester, right? So I'm always getting in, right? The deal is that every time it's harder and harder and harder for me to get in. And what's even more important is that if I don't get in, or when I do get in, did you see it what did you do about it? I love it when organizations blue team me. It's fucking awesome, right? It makes it fun. It's better than a video game when I can see them actively trying to stop me. Now, it's usually something crazy like just taking file shares just straight offline or whatever, but you just never know. But it makes me feel good because they detected my attack, right? So a perfect example of this, and like this is what we should do as penetration testers, is help people monitor. So I was just in an organization, Bravo Hacks, Eric and I wrote a little tool called SMB Exec, and we use it for SMB logins. And so what was so awesome about it is that once you get a credential, like you give it to the tool and it logs in, and then it pulls clear text, hashes, and domain cache credentials out. The thing is that we never use it until we get one legitimate credential, right? And so every time we use that in an organization, we ask them afterwards, hey, did you see any SMB activity? And they'll be like, no. And I'll say, what are you monitoring for? And they'll say, we're monitoring for, the standard failed logins, like 3 password account lockout or whatever nonsense like that. I was like, well, so do you look for like legitimate multiple logins, like, all at the same time? Like if some user logs into 5 computers in 1 minute, like, wouldn't that be weird? And they'd be like, oh, fuck, we never thought of that, right? So like a lot of times I help organizations figure out what to monitor, right? So that's something that they don't always know. Everybody knows I love passwords. So I've been probably 2 places in the past 4 years that I felt like had an adequate password policy, and unfortunately, like, I know this is a really hard thing to get by, but if your password policy sucks and is the default Windows, I mean, like, it's only a matter of time before somebody's going to get in, right? So, I mean, when I come into an organization and the password policy is really, really weak, I just know, like, they're not as worried about security as they should be. These people aren't ready for a pen test. You got to know who's attacking you, right? So this goes back to like what a lot of people, there was a lot of threat model talks this weekend, and threat modeling can help, right? Because we can't protect against everything, right? So you need to know who's attacking you, right? Because there's several people, right? There's Anonymous, although she's pretty hot. But anyway, there's state-sponsored attacks, there's insider threats, there's all of this kind of stuff, right? Can we protect against it all? No. But can we protect against it in a categorized risk fashion? Yes. So if we know that we're a big target for hacktivists, like, if our organization, like, makes Chinese kids make clothes or something, I mean, like, then we're a target for hacktivists, right? I mean, like, they might target us. So when I go into somewhere, I'm like, all right, what are we attacking against, right? Because securing against insider threats is totally different than securing against, like, China or something. Totally different mentality in the organization. So if you don't know what you're doing in that situation, you don't know what you're doing. This is probably the number one thing that I harp on from any organization, and that most places just cannot get right, is network segmentation. If I come into your organization and you tell me the entire network's flat and you got 22/16s all across the globe, I already know that it's over to begin with, right? Because like it's like a wide open ballpark. So network segmentation is probably one of the most important things you can do in an organization. And guess what? Besides the people that got to put it in place, it's free. Like, everybody has the structure in place to already do this. It's an inconvenience to people that are trying to do their jobs to call IT and be like, oh, I need such and such port open on the firewall so I can get to Red China or whatever. And so I'll push this more and more, and I like to give an example about network segmentation, why it's so important. And I use this in all my phishing talks, but who here has an HR department? They suck, right? The thing about HR is that, like, it's not a super high-paid job, right? And so they typically don't really care about the company all that much. Because if you're only making a little bit of money and your IT people are making a ton of money, like, they just don't care as much, right? So their job is not security, and they don't pay them enough to be secure, right? And guess what their entire job is in the HR department? Opening up PDFs and Word documents all day. So how do you secure an organization that their entire job is opening up high-risk documents, right? That sucks. So what do? You segment them off fucking way the hell over there somewhere, right? So, like, if you take it by business unit, the way I like to tell people to do is take it by business unit. It's easier than by building or by floor or any of that. You say, all right, who's in the HR department and what do they really need in our organization. They need to authenticate to Active Directory, and they need to, get to like one or two like applications where they enter in all their HR type data or whatever. I don't even know what the fuck they do, but I'm assuming it's not much, and they just put it in some database somewhere so that they know who applied for what, right? So that's like 2 or 3 things, right? It should be really easy for me to put a firewall in between them and my organization that only does those couple of things, right? And I should be able to do that for every single business unit on my network. Am I going to get it totally secure? No. Am I going to reduce the attack surface? Yes. The more I segment, the more I reduce the attack surface. So that way, when I get home at night, and I'm sitting in my chair and I'm watching TV, I'm not worrying about who's opening what PDF in my organization, because I know that I've got them segmented properly. Like, I like to get to a mentality of, I don't really care if they open a PDF, because their computer doesn't have any critical data on it and it can't get anywhere, right? Something else that's important is hire a pen tester, right? I mean, there's a lot of people like me that have been on the road for years and years and years and would be looking for a blue team job at home. The problem is that they never pay enough, right? So unfortunately, once you get used to the consultant's life, it's really hard to go to a blue team job because they don't understand the value of having a pen tester on staff. And so, who saw Dave's talk yesterday about the purple team? So that shit is super important, right? Because the people that are pen testers think of all kinds of things that the people that are blue teamers don't think of. So when they work together, it's just an obvious like synergy, right? And so the problem is that blue teaming is not sexy. I mean, everybody I know that's on a blue team is overworked. They do like 50 different thousand things. They can't concentrate on what they want to concentrate on. They don't have the funding and they don't get paid enough. I'm actually shocked sometimes when I hear what people are getting paid defending some of these Fortune 500 organizations. Like, I'm really shocked, and I'm not surprised they're getting owned, right? So if we could add a little bling bling to the blue team, get some extra cash in there, a little shout out. I need a new grill. So, more pen testers might want to come onto a blue team and turn into a purple team like Dave was talking about, right? I'd like nothing more than to go to a big organization and help them secure it. I really would. But unfortunately, that's not usually the case. And I guess I'll keep pen testing on the road. Something else that's really important. Research the vendor that you're using for your pen tests. You never know who they might be. Now, how do you research a vendor, right? Do you go on Google and see how much money they make? No. Do you see how many assets they have or how many fancy tools they have? No. So there's several ways to research a vendor, but what I like to do is I like to determine my organizations by how passionate they are about information security, right? And the way that I do that is, how many conferences do they go to? How many free talks do they give? How many times do they travel to China on their own dime so that they can talk to people about information security? And so there's a lot of people in the industry that are like that. And those are the people that I would like to hire, because they don't care about the money. They care about securing the organization, and they care about information security. Thought leaders. Beware of the thought leader. Honestly, I know the term's stupid, but there are a few thought leaders in the organization, in information security, but they're not calling themselves thought leaders on stage, for sure. This is kind of like Dave was talking about. I put this up there to be funny, but he was talking about, we're in the news right now. We're in a really special place in information security because all of these breaches are happening, and they're getting a lot of publicity. And the thing is that we're in a unique position to get more funding and bring a lot of this stuff to the surface. And so, it's really cool that people like Dave are getting on TV, even though it's mostly fucking Fox, but whatever. So it's really cool that people like Dave are being able to get on TV and tell the real, tell it like it really is, and get the stuff about information security out there. if you don't know what's in your organization, you have no idea what you're protecting, right? And Dave stole my thunder on this one too, but the thing is that there is so much data out there on an organization. There's PDFs, there's files, there's all that. And it's cool that it's out there. There's nothing that you can do about it. However, you need to know about it in advance, right? If you know it's out there, you can formulate, an attack against it. Just like Dave was talking about, I can go on LinkedIn and monster.com and a couple of job interview sites, and I can figure out all of the defenses that you have in place by the job applications that you're asking for. And pretty much every company, including my own, is guilty of this, right? And so, unfortunately, that gives attackers a leg up on your organization. So if you don't even know what you're protecting, against or about, then you're already in a bad situation. I know I jumped the gun on this one, but this is back to the P-test, right? There's a lot of security organizations out there that are just in it for the money, right? They come in, they got a vulnerability scanner, they got some dude that they pay like $30K a year out of, like some crappy college. He runs the vulnerability scanner, changes the header, and he walks out, right? So this is where you research your vendor. And if you do get a shitty vendor, it happens, right? Not everybody knows what's up. Oops. If you do get a shitty vendor, go to the P-test standard and make sure that you got what you paid for, right? So that you can go back and say, look, this asshole didn't do this, he didn't do this, and he didn't do this. And then you can work that out. That's some kind of sales shit I don't have anything to do with. But so this is an interesting question, like whose fault is all of this, right? Why do organizations not know how to do this, right? And so I really don't know. And so that's what I'm working on. I'd like to say that it's the salesperson's fault because everybody likes to pick on salespeople, but I'm not sure that that's really the case. I know in my organization specifically, I feel like we as the pen testers are a little bit at fault because we don't arm our salespeople and our solutions engineers with enough facts about the difference between all this type of testing and what they're ready for, because we're always out there billing and fixing things and doing pen tests, right? So we don't have the time to properly arm those people about it, right? I just assume that because people work at a security company, they're as passionate as information security about me, but unfortunately that's not the case, right? Some people are just there for the paycheck or whatever, So, if anybody has any comments on whose fault some of this stuff is, I'm interested to talk about it because I don't really know, right? But I feel like it's a big gap, like in information security, where companies don't know what type of testing they need, and they don't know what they're buying, and they don't know how to get from A to B. They don't know how to get from a risk assessment to a penetration test. So what should I get out of a pen test, right? So this is really important. What should you as the organization be getting out of the pen test? So like I said, you're not going to find every vulnerability with a penetration test. The point of it is to find the path of least resistance, because that's the path that you're most likely going to be attacked on. So that's why when I go into an organization, I don't find the sexiest, coolest thing that I can do to get in to make my report look super baller, because that's not what I call the path of least resistance, right? I'm going to find the most glaring, obvious way that every single dude in the Turkish basement in his mom's computer is looking at, right? Because those are the people that are after you, right? So understanding the process of attack, right? So once I understand the process of attack, I can put the proper monitoring in place. I can make some cool threat modeling graphs and all that shit. And I can put the proper incident response in place, because everybody's going to get owned at one time. That's why incident response is so important. If you don't think you're going to get owned, you're in bad shape, right? Everybody's going to get owned. Even the Backtrack website got owned one time, right? Everybody remember that? It happens, dude. There's nothing you can do about it because it's you against the fucking world, right? So at some point, something bad's going to happen. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to handle it? How are you going to protect your brand? That stuff is super important. So smart people can even find issues that were never thought of by the blue team. This is what I like to talk about, where hire a pen tester, right? I think of stuff all the time that the blue team never thought about, and they think of things all the time that I never thought about. So working together is probably the only way in the future that we're going to be able to bring together some of these ideas and stuff. So, cool, that's all I got. Sorry it was so short. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. So one of the main ones that like I was talking about was like Starbucks gift cards, especially like on phishing attacks, right? So like whenever a phishing something or other goes down, like the first, like 5 or 10 people to report the email get like a $10 Starbucks gift card. I mean, I've seen, and the same thing with like reporting physical vulnerabilities. Obviously, you're not going to get most people in your organization to be like, hey, you know what? I was doing my work yesterday and I noticed a default Tomcat server or whatever. But, that's probably not going to happen. But for physical security and social engineering and stuff, there's a lot of that kind of stuff, right? And so, like, they were talking about earlier, like businesses driven by closing tickets. Like, yeah, that sucks. However, if you modify that type of thing to closing security vulnerability tickets, it becomes a little bit different, right? So if I say, and I don't say I'm going to fire you if I don't do it, but if I say, look, Georgia, if you close 5 high-risk tickets by the end of the week, I'll take you out to dinner on Friday night or whatever. I'll give you a Starbucks gift card or I'll do everything. For me, incentive programs work really better than, penalizing people. Like, people like to get shit. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody, for waking up on 10 o'clock on a Sunday.